The year is 1990. If you're in the West, you've exhausted each Dragon Warrior game and you're looking for something to fill that void. You hear that Final Fantasy, the popular Japanese RPG, is a worthy alternative to other popular role-playing games. Since it just arrived overseas, you've picked up the game, put the cartridge into your NES, and are ready to be blown away by this new adventure. Having been born in 1995, I can't relate to this at all. In fact, the only Final Fantasy game I've actually played is Final Fantasy 15, which I did enjoy contrary to popular opinion. But thanks to remasters, I can play the first game now and see if it holds up in modern times, so that's exactly what I've done. My name is Max Moeller and welcome to Clickin'. This is Final Fantasy, a newcomer's perspective. Before really getting into the video, note that I played the PlayStation 1 remaster of Final Fantasy. It's called Final Fantasy Origins, and from what I hear, it's a pretty faithful recreation of the original game. That said, this remaster features better graphics, a CGI version of the opening cutscenes, remixed music, and some additional areas. The remaster also includes an easier difficulty, some bug fixes, different spell lists, and a few other minor changes as well. But to stay as faithful as possible to the original, I played on the normal difficulty, which is supposedly the same as the original difficulty from the original game. I don't think it's controversial to say that the first Final Fantasy game is boring. This is a title from 1987 bogged down by tedious combat scenarios and a story as minimal as one can be. It isn't all bad and I don't regret playing it, and many remember the game fondly for good reason, but as a first-time Final Fantasy player in 2020, I can tell you that this game struggles to hold up without nostalgia goggles. Final Fantasy is the first game in the massive franchise that we all know and love. It was created by Hironobu Sakaguchi, and it is the game that saved Square from bankruptcy after its other games simply weren't selling very well. Final Fantasy also put RPGs on the map in America, and it even became a direct competitor to the Dragon Quest series for some time. The story, written by Kenji Terada, was based on an idea by Sakaguchi himself. However, the idea of 4 crystals, the gems that Final Fantasy's plot revolves around, was brought in by Koichi Ishii, another designer that Sakaguchi convinced to join the project. The game's turn-based battle system was built by Akitoshi Kawazu, who was inspired by games like Dungeons & Dragons and Wizardry. In an interview with Retronauts back in 2017, Kawazu claimed that the idea of type weaknesses, such as ice being susceptible to fire, came from playing Dungeons & Dragons and another popular game at the time called Ultima. Before Final Fantasy, Japanese RPGs didn't really have anything of the sort, though games like Wizardry, which was made by the American-Canadian studio Surtech, had incorporated item effects in battle. The designer wanted these type relationships in-game and he wanted them to be prevalent. It's thanks to him we have type fighting in most JRPGs today. I say this because it's important to consider how revolutionary Final Fantasy was at the time. There was nothing quite like the game in Japan, and it made a strong enough impact in the West to warrant it becoming the franchise we all know and love today. But this video is about if the game holds up playing today, and as I mentioned, getting through it is a slog. Final Fantasy's story starts simple enough. The world has been surrounded by darkness and it has nothing to look forward to but a prophecy that states, "When darkness veils the world, 4 warriors of light shall come." So you can guess who you get to play as. These 4 warriors are meant to recover 4 crystals, each guarded by a violent fiend that wants to wreak evil on the world. It's only once these crystals are found that the warriors can even stand a chance at saving the world. What's cool is that you get to name these heroes to be. Mine are Max, which is me, Aya, named after my dog, Norm, a random online dog that my dog likes, and Liara, my favorite companion from the Mass Effect series. I plan on carrying these names through each Final Fantasy game that allows me to rename its characters. But this intro cutscene is about as interesting as the plot gets for some time. From here, the game just feels like a giant fetch quest with nothing to motivate you. There's no depth to any characters, there's no side quests, or really anything to learn about the who's and what's in this world. Sure, there are some plot points that could have been cool, like a vampire terrorizing a town, or a dark elf who tricks you into getting him a crown before coming after you and almost killing you, but these moments don't really have any weight. There's no exploring the vampire's backstory to learn why he's after this town, or how he's done it. You just kinda go kill him and you forget about it. All these moments do is contextualize your fetch quest for a brief moment without contributing anything to the greater plot. It doesn't help that it takes forever to get from one story point to another thanks to the title's random battles and loads of backtracking. It's likely that you'll forget why you were even sent a certain way by the time you actually get to the spot you were trying to go. It's because of this that I started using a guide about halfway through the game just to ease my suffering a bit. I'll go more into that later, but let's just say the plot has failed to engage me. And this was the case until the end of the game, where I received some semblance of a backstory for Final Fantasy's main villain, Chaos. It's here I learned that Chaos has stuck himself in a time loop. The game's 4 story-based bosses, otherwise known as the 4 Fiends, were sent into the future to send Chaos back in time, which creates a time paradox. It's in the past where Chaos tries to destroy the world so the future does not exist. That is, until you obviously defeat him at the end. It's just that this comes so late into the journey that I wouldn't blame you for not getting there. Until the end, there's no motivation to do really anything in this game. If you want to beat it for the sake of beating it, great. But for players like myself, you'll really struggle with the lack of major plot points to pull everything together. As for the world, you'll come across a few quirky characters from time to time, like a pirate who ultimately rescinds his evil deeds after you beat him, and he even gives you a ship to show how sorry he is. But unless you're using a guide, you have to talk to NPCs to learn where to go next. Some will mention specific areas, hinting at where you're to go next on your adventure. I actually really like this part of the game. There isn't really a quest log or a compass. You're provided a world to explore and the NPCs have to tell you how to navigate. This design choice lends itself to a real sense of adventure instead of just following a marker like a lot of modern games. It's a less accessible choice for sure, but it certainly caters to more hardcore players. I just wish the areas and characters that you do explore had more to them. Is this a limitation of the tech at the time? Yeah, I'm sure that's part of it, but it's clear the team's priorities were on gameplay and world design rather than the story. And this is fair, considering that even with a fantastic story, gameplay was king back in the day, and failing on that end would have marked the end of the franchise before it even started. So yeah, if I haven't made it clear, the plot isn't the reason to play the first Final Fantasy. Combat is unquestionably the best part of the game, especially if playing on the normal difficulty. In this mode, items were more expensive and bosses and enemies had more health, among other changes from the easy mode. And even though it's an older game, this one's combat makes up in depth for what the story lacks. There's type matching, a wide variety of classes to choose from, and loads of weapons and items. There are no save points in dungeons, meaning you have to take your characters through dozens of battles and win or escape before saving any of that progress. This means you're preserving magic points because there's no magic restore item, and keeping an eye on your potion supply, while also making sure to fight enough enemies that you continue leveling and exploring to find better items and gold. This game requires grind, but it's also beneficial to search dungeons and find every single advantage you can. For example, some inventory items have spells that you can cast with them, like my gauntlets that had Bolt 2. I really like this. It turned one of my more useless characters, the Thief, into something viable since I could use Bolt 2 all the time instead of his weak-ass attack. Or in later dungeons, I ended up having 2 healing helmets. When used, these didn't heal a ton of HP, only 15 or 30, but they were unlimited use. Instead of wasting my potions, I'd have my knight and my red mage attack enemies, while my thief and my white mage would use the healing helmet, giving everyone about 50 HP without wasting a single resource. This tactical depth is exactly what I'm looking for in a turn-based RPG, and as exciting as these moments were, I do have to stress that most of these battles were kind of a pushover. I was just grinding through so many dungeons without much thought, only tactically thinking during the really long endgame ones or for some of the harder bosses. And this is a shame because as cool as all these items and weapons are, once you kind of figure out all your advantages, the game is a little too easy unless you're massively underleveled. That said, I did have a bit of an edge because I explored most of each area, gathering all of the items and gold possible to buff my characters, and I learned about all this due to the guide, though I made sure not to look at any tips for bosses or enemies, as the game has a bestiary which provides enemy strengths and weaknesses anyways. And even without the guide, I would have just explored all the dungeons myself regardless and found any secret items and enemies. It would have just taken me an unnecessary amount of hours longer. But back to the random battles. I complained about them at the beginning, but I don't hate random battles as a concept. My issue here, especially with the first half of the game, is that I picked a poor set of classes. As mentioned, there are tons of classes to pick from, but I chose mine based on their class descriptions. I didn't use a guide or look up online what the best combination of classes would be. Each class has its own set of weapons and armor pieces to find throughout the game, but because you can only pick between 4, many of these pickups couldn't go towards the ones in my party. I initially found it a little odd that so many drops can be essentially useless if you don't know any better ahead of time, but upon further thought, this really just lends itself to replayability, encouraging users to play through multiple times with different classes. But yeah, what really sucked is my monk. He barely did any damage, and he was always a wasted turn until I started gathering the usable items I mentioned earlier. And by then, my monk just became a dedicated item user. And if anything, I actually came to enjoy him later on for this exact reason, though I wonder if I simply would have been more effective with a more powerful character on their own to replace him, rather than a throwaway I would use to heal my other characters. This especially hurts because the monk description is really cool. Regardless, even with this item dump of a class, in the latter third of the game, my party started to kick ass. I loved challenging them and seeing how long they could survive without an inn or using a cottage in the overworld to heal, and I did this especially in the Mirage Tower and the flying ship sequence, which are back to back. Essentially, what you do here is you have to climb through the Mirage Tower, fighting through a bunch of enemies, and then you get into a second area called the Flying Ship without the ability to heal or save. You have to fight through both of these areas entirely and survive if you want to progress through the game. The boss, Tiamat, wrecked me a few times until I figured out that I could just stack Saber, which is an attack boosting ability, as many times as I want to do massive damage. Essentially, my fighter sacrificed 2 turns to use Saber, my other party members took hits, and then my fighter took him out in 2 turns with this massively increased power. That's what I like about turn-based RPGs like this. When I'm presented with a big challenge, I have to exhaust everything that I have to try and beat it. This means trying different strategies over and over again in a desperate attempt to overcome this boss. There wasn't enough of that in this game, and I say this even after using a pretty weak build in hindsight. So to summarize, the game has great combat, but not enough challenging encounters for that to shine through. Many of them are bland, boring, and I just sat through a podcast and ground through them instead of actually engaging with the title. From a visual standpoint, the Final Fantasy remaster looks fine. I don't have a problem with many of the enemy or character designs, though much like the battles, only a few of them actually stand out to me. And this is strange, but comparing this game to footage of the NES title, it's definitely harder to see the specific designs on the PS1 version. Like for example, your party on the NES version is cleaner. It's kind of hilarious because they just all look angry all of the time, and I love that. But during my playthrough on the PS1, it's really hard to tell what emotion anyone is giving off. They're all just kind of there with blank faces on. It's kind of grimy, and that extends to the game's few cutscenes as well. That said, there is a scene later on where you head underwater, and I think this one had a little bit of charm even if it was really short. The overworld is certainly more detailed in the remaster, and I do prefer this one to the comparatively bland NES one. Of course, everything from the forests to the sand to the towns are more detailed, and I really like the look of the oceans in the more history towns like Melman. But the older game's brighter color palette is one I wish carried over in the remaster. But Origins is pretty dark, with so many browns and muted greens it looks like an FPS from the PS3 era. And while that scheme fits the story for sure, it certainly isn't as welcoming as the rainbow of colors in the NES version. It's with these colors and remastered design that I can say Final Fantasy Origins is presented well enough, though there are a few glaring issues that tarnish the experience. For one, the game crashes often and for no reason, as in I can't find any pattern or recurring reasons as to why. There were just times I'd be playing, I'd load into a new area, and the screen would remain black. And a lot of the times leading up to these scenarios, the game's music would just slow down a few beats and make everything a bit off. You'd kind of wonder what was going on, but you'd also kind of forget about it, and then the game would crash, and I'd lose, at times, hours of progress. The game is only saved during a rest at an inn or when using a tent item in the overworld. So if you're an hour into a tough dungeon and the game freezes, you're screwed. Not even the temporary reload feature, which allows you to retry from the previous save point after dying, can help you, because that save is wiped after each console reset. In fact, it's because of this crash that I never got to officially finish the game. The very last dungeon before Chaos, the final boss, is long. It requires you to go up a few floors, then go back down them a different way, and then head into various basement floors. During this time, you're fighting against stronger versions of the 4 fiends from beforehand. It's a genuine challenge and one of the best parts of the game. You have to go for a long period of time without saving or using MP items. You have to make sure your team has enough health and magic to even fight Chaos by the time you get to him. Unfortunately, after spending 50 minutes to an hour fighting through the dungeon, getting through a couple of the 4 fiends, and pushing up to the final floor before Chaos, my game crashed. This didn't just happen once, but this happened 5 times across the course of a few days. It was infuriating, especially because my team performed quite well. I was more than ready to take on Chaos, but after the 5th crash and hours of my limited time wasted, I gave up to watch the ending on YouTube. I absolutely hate that this happened, but I was more than confident in my team's skills, and I wasn't going to waste more hours on one fight that I might not even get to see. It's really unfortunate, but I don't think anyone can fault me for moving on. The 98% of the game that I was able to play is more than enough to critique it thoroughly anyways. Otherwise, there are a few quirks that I think give the game charm, but some players might not enjoy. For one, you can only carry 99 potions. These run out fast and aren't all that useful towards the end. This means you may use 20 potions to heal up after one bad battle. Also, the lack of magic restoration items could prove annoying for some, but I actually really enjoyed the challenge. It meant I can't just spam one spell every battle, restore it, and then use it in the next fight after that. I had to be very careful and use some spells only 5 times throughout an entire dungeon. Or once you get the airship a little more than halfway through the game, you can't just land it wherever you want. At times, Final Fantasy forces you to land the ship far, far away from the city you're going towards. This means you have to trek all the way through the map to get there, ensuring the airship doesn't break the game or anything like that. Also, armor, weapons, and spells are expensive. You have to grind to afford them, which isn't super appealing to everyone. If you don't mind the grind, it shouldn't bother you too much, but you should maybe keep a few podcasts on hand to get through the tougher periods. Otherwise, the backtracking can get annoying, as I mentioned. You also have to manually compare armor and weapon stats, which can get pretty tedious. But as long as you realize this game is from the late 80s, you might be more forgiving towards these design choices. Final Fantasy is certainly a game from times past. Despite lacking any sort of an engaging plot, the tactical gameplay started a franchise that has evolved far past this initial attempt, spanning 15 mainline titles and endless spin-offs, while saving its developer in the process. Lacking any sort of nostalgia for the series, it's not a title I can easily recommend. On top of the boring story, most of the game is way too easy, and it involves tons of grind which can push some away as well. But it's not a game I regret playing, and I'm honored to have experienced this piece of gaming history. I'm happy it's over, and I'm looking forward to starting the second game, which I hear really ramps it up in the story department. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed the episode, be sure to like the video and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'll see you guys in the next one.